and we want to stick to the time limits. But if we want to do that, we need to begin on time. So once again, good morning and welcome to the. Wait, let me just remind you in case.
There are possibility for translation from English to Polish and from Polish to English, and it's over there. Jeżeli Państwo potrzebujecie, jest możliwość wypożyczenia urządzeń tłumaczących. Ponieważ pierwsza część...
Okay, the first part
and the second part will be in Polish in English. Dzień dobry, witam.
Right, so once again, good morning and welcome to the second day of this international conference, Transformation, How We Are Changing Theater Schools. Today we begin with a panel with the optimistic title, Precarity, which will consist of three presentations, actually a film screening, two presentations, and then a discussion in which you're all invited to take part. So here goes. We'll kick off with a screening of a film entitled Our Life is Crap. But the Polish w dupie means kind of up shit creek. Okay, not our life up. Okay, or my life in art, our life in as or up. Anyway, here's the film, which has subtitles.
Tam miałem całkiem niezłą stawkę, dlatego że zarabiałem bodajże 18 zł za godzinę.
Odstąpili mi jakąś kwotę przez to, że jakby nie miałam tam umowy. No i tam ile można było zarobić? 600 to max.
200 zł.
20 zł za zamówienie.
To było 8 zł w tamtym momencie.
To nie były duże pieniądze.
Na umowie miałam 3,50 za godzinę.
Zarabiam minimalną stawkę za godzinę na umowie zlecenia.
Minimalną krajową.
Najniższa krajowa.
Najniższą.
Minimalna.
Najniższą.
Najniższa krajowa.
I jak to w kościele bywa co łaska.
No więc ochłapy.
Ale jak myślę o takim swoim pierwszym doświadczeniu takiej prawdziwej pracy, to było w ogóle jakieś traumatyczne.
Byłam nauczona tego, żeby nie rozmawiać o tych pieniądzach przed tym ślubem, tylko po prostu była taka niepisana umowa, że zaśpiewam ten ślub, a potem przychodzi jakiś świadek z kopertą, z pieniędzmi, z kwotą, którą po prostu uznali, że mogą mi dać.
Przyszłam, przeliczyłam kopertę, bo wtedy dostawaliśmy pieniądze w kopercie, nie na konto. I okazało się, że brakuje tam 100-200 zł i powiedziałam, że brakuje tych pieniędzy i ona mówi, nie, jak to, halo, przecież wszystko się zgadza, tak jak powinno być. Mówię, że nie, że nie jest tak, że pracowałam jeszcze wtedy i że wtedy też zarobiłam jakieś pieniądze i ona mówi do mnie, ta dziewczyna, dobrze, no to chodź tam razem ze mną do biura, to zobaczymy.
Nasz szef zamontował kamery i wtedy zawsze mógł nas obserwować i na przykład jak nie było klientów, to dzwonił do nas i mówił, hej, widzę na kamerze, że się nudzisz.
Pochyla się nade mną tak bardzo, bardzo blisko, jakieś 3 centymetry od mojej twarzy i mówi, pojebało cię? Z kim ty tutaj kurwa przychodzisz? Ty jesteś jakaś nienormalna, pojebana.
Trafiłam na ogłoszenie, w którym pisano, że szukają osoby do prowadzenia klientów przez internet. No, brzmiało to tak dość neutralnie, ale też dość enigmatycznie. Poszłam na rozmowę, powiedziano mi, że będę pisać z jakimiś ludźmi, po prostu, że oni mogą czasem jakoś tak dziwnie zagadywać, ale żebym się nie przejmowała i że mam dbać o dobry wizerunek firmy, ale nie do końca wiedziałam, co właściwie miałabym tam robić mimo wszystko.
Gdy się stało przy taśmie, to się stało w taki bardzo nienaturalny sposób, że w sumie po pierwszym tygodniu pracy prawie zemdlałam z bólu.
Trzeba było pracować danego dnia minimum 6 godzin, żeby przysługiwało pół godziny przerwy.
I bardzo często szefostwo robiło tak, że dawało zmiany 5 godzin 55 minut, żeby nikt nie miał przerwy.
Oficjalnie zmiana jest 12 godzin i nie powinnam pracować więcej, a zdarzało się, że pracowałam po 14 godzin.
Okazało się, że to są takie czatroomy, rozmowy erotyczne generalnie. Byłyśmy z paroma innymi dziewczynami, zdaje się, chociaż nie widziałam ich za bardzo, bo były oddzielne pokoje. Przed komputerem, bez kamery, znaczy były z kamerkami, ale można było ją wyłączyć. I rozmawialiśmy z ludźmi, którzy się tam zgłaszali. To był jakiś po angielsku, to był jakiś nie wiem, czat wprowadzony przez jakąś firmę. Właśnie nie dało się nawet za bardzo danych znaleźć. No i spędziłam tam jeden dzień, miałam dostać następnego dnia umowę, którą chciałam przeczytać i w ogóle tak byłam ciekawa tego trochę, więc zostałam tam. Chociaż te rozmowy bardzo szybko się zrobiły właśnie takie erotyczne. W sumie chyba ta kamerka też ostatecznie została włączona.
Mamy swoje mundurki i dziewczyny muszą chodzić w spódniczkach i w butach na obcasach. I faktycznie któregoś dnia po prostu wysiadło mi kolano po paru godzinach chodzenia na obcasach.
Jak się nie podpisało na przykład umowy żadnej w ciągu 8 godzin pracy danego dnia, to na przykład babeczka liderka potrafiła zawiesić worek na śmieci na oparciu fotela, jeszcze taki truskawkowy z Biedronki, ja teraz mam po prostu traumę, jak je czuję, i człowiek musiał siedzieć z tym workiem, dopóki nie spisał umowy w tym dniu.
Mimo że pracuje się od 3 lat, jest się doświadczonym, powiedzmy zostało się jako ostatnia osoba, która jest tam na tym stanowisku, może pomóc też innym, a mimo wszystko czujesz się jak śmieć.
Przyszłam jeszcze kolejnego dnia. Coraz bardziej sytuacja robiła się dziwna, czułam jakąś taką presję i chciałam stamtąd wyjść, ale jeszcze dziewczyna, która była naszą nadzorczynią w tamtym miejscu, to było na takiej dość dalekiej woli, dała mi tę umowę, ja zaczęłam ją czytać i uświadomiłam sobie, że to jest właśnie jakaś taka praca seksualna bardziej, chociaż teoretycznie nas do niczego nie zmuszają. Czułam się bardzo źle, nie wiedziałam, co z tym zrobić i gdy ta kobieta się na chwilę oddaliła, chciałam zrobić zdjęcie tej umowy. Wiedziałam, że tak się nie robi, ale chciałam mieć jakąś podkładkę, żeby odzyskać też te 2 dni, w których prepracowałam i wiedziałam, że nie dostanę za nich pieniędzy, bo nie podpiszę tej umowy. Ale ona to zauważyła, zaczęła na mnie krzyczeć, wyrwała mi tą umowę. No, nie pobiła mnie, ale generalnie czułam jakąś taką fizyczną opresję z jej strony. Zabrałam wszystkie rzeczy i poszłam stamtąd.
Czasami się sokolnika zamawia, żeby ten sokół pozabijał te gołębie, prawda? No ale mimo wszystko te gołębie są i czasami jak są na przykład takie palety, no to jak jest na nich folia, no to tam wszędzie są gówna. I pamiętam, że zdejmowałam tą folię i musiałam to ogarnąć i byłam też na słuchawkach na zajęciach online i w tym momencie profesor Adamiecka poprosiła nas o obejrzenie fragmentu z Grotowskiego i ja takie, o nie, nie w tym momencie. No ale szybko się ogarnęłam, powiedziałam, że idę do toalety, umyłam ręce i zamknęłam się w kabinie i oglądałam ten fragment Grotowskiego, żeby móc cokolwiek powiedzieć.
Oczekuje się od nas, żebyśmy byli tak wszechstronni, jakbyśmy mieli cały czas na świecie, a nie mamy, musimy się utrzymywać.
Dzięki trybowi online miałam za co przeżyć, bo w sumie mogłam pracować od 7 do 19 na poczcie.
Wejdźmy teraz na stronę www.akademia.at.edu.pl. Kliknijmy w zakładkę Kierunki studiów. 3. kolumna od lewej, czyli wiedza o teatrze. Kliknijmy w Informacje. Wiedza o teatrze, informacje i sylwetka absolwenta.
Oczekiwania wobec studentek i studentów wiedzy o teatrze myślę, że są.
Przede wszystkim bycia w wielu miejscach naraz, żeby jednocześnie mieć wspaniałą frekwencję i jednocześnie bywać na wszystkich premierach i pracować też i zdobywać doświadczenie.
Myślę, że powinni być cisi, niewychylający się.
Żeby przyjaźnić się z każdym, robić mnóstwo znajomości, plotkować o wszystkim, ze wszystkimi, ale jednocześnie pamiętać, kto się z kim przyjaźni, kto się z kim lubi, a kto się z kim nie lubi.
Na 1., 2. roku było mi trudniej, tak psychicznie, bo te oczekiwania były ogromne, żeby robić wszystko od razu dobrze, idealnie, a niektórzy wykładowcy nie potrafili dawać takiego zdrowego feedbacku.
Totalnie po jednym egzaminie popłakałam się, że dostałam 4+, bo stwierdziłam, że jestem za głupia na ten kierunek i że po prostu wszyscy już wszystko wiedzą, wszyscy już wszystko przeczytali i moje ulubione jest, jak jest wykład jakiś i prowadząca mówi, no ale wy znacie to już albo oglądaliście to już, na pewno o tym wiecie i jak ja widzę, że wszyscy kiwają głowami, a ja mówię, kurwa, kto to jest?
A ja kiwałem głową, że to jest oczywiście, no to jest oczywiste, no ale udawałem.
Że może jestem niewystarczająco dobra na te studia, że może po prostu się nie nadaję na te studia i że co ja sobie w ogóle wymyśliłam.
Jest jednak wokół tego jakaś legenda.
Na początku, zwłaszcza tak miałem na studiach licencjackich, trochę byłem onieśmielony. Miałem wrażenie, że inni są z jakichś super inteligenckich domów, że już wszystko przeczytali, wszystko wiedzą.
Myślę, że może być przytłaczające, jeśli jakby nie ma się takiej umiejętności powiedzenia sobie stop, teraz są na przykład ważniejsze rzeczy, które nie są związane z tymi studiami.
Studiujemy i mówimy o jakichś w ogóle wspaniałych rzeczach i oglądamy jakieś takie niesamowicie nowe, ciekawe sposoby robienia teatru, performance'u, tego wszystkiego, co jest gdzieś pomiędzy, jakby przywala się nas tą współczesną humanistyką, która jest jakaś bardzo pociągająca i potem my stąd wychodzimy z takim poczuciem, dobra, teraz jakby muszę to przełożyć na życie, jeszcze móc się utrzymać i fajnie by było, żeby to nie było utrzymanie na poziomie jakimś głodowym, nie?
Absolwent WOT posiada wszechstronne wykształcenie humanistyczne. Jest przygotowany zarówno do pracy w różnych instytucjach teatralnych, w prasie specjalistycznej oraz innych mediach, jak i do animacji kultury, np. organizowanie i prowadzenie teatrów amatorskich. W ten sposób łączy wiedzę o teatrze z praktyczną umiejętnością promocji kultury teatralnej.
A jacy studenci WOT-u dostają pracę w teatrze? Myślę, że tacy, którzy się jakoś wybiją na zajęciach.
Ja uczę dziecko Magdy Popławskiej i to jest najbliżej teatru, jak byłam i mam nadzieję, że nie najbliżej jak będę, no ale zobaczymy. Od tej takiej dróżki, że od bileterki do koordynatorki, poprzez kierowniczkę, suflerkę, asystentkę i inspicjentkę. No nie, to jest taka... Trzeba to lubić po prostu.
Próbowałam raz na kasę do Nowego Teatru, ale zostałam skreślona. W sensie byłam na rozmowie, ale no podobno to nie było to.
Ostatnio korki się odbywały w Nowym Teatrze, w sensie tam w bufecie. No i poszłyśmy z Hanią odebrać sushi, które jej mama zamówiła. No i wracamy i ona tak mówi, wiesz Marianna, no bo no ja bym cię mogła tam zabrać tam na dół, nie? Bo ja mogę tam chodzić, ale ja nie wiem w sumie, czy ty możesz tam wejść. No i mi się zrobiło przykro, że nie możemy tam wejść i to jest taka zakazana strefa, do której 6-latka ma dostęp, a ja nie.
Tak, odrzucono mnie też z Teatru Żydowskiego, więc to jest kolejny teatr, w którym nie będę pracowała.
Pod artykułem Dariusza Kosińskiego na Facebooku wyliczyłem błędy w komentarzu. Co się spodobało jednemu wykładowcy, który mnie polecił.
I dostałam informację, że nie będę też pracowała w Teatrze 21, gdzie też ostatnio składałam CV, także mam dużo tych ofert odrzuconych.
Dostałam wiadomość od mojej koleżanki na roku i ona napisała, słuchajcie, Plata powiedział mi, że w komunie szukają kogoś do zajmowania się social mediami.
Moja pierwsza praca w teatrze to były praktyki, bezpłatne, ale krótkie. I po tych praktykach co jakiś czas teraz dostaję różne zlecenia.
Tak naprawdę nie było żadnej takiej rozmowy konkretnej, która by ustalała moje przygotowanie do tej pracy. Nigdy w życiu nie zobaczyli mojego CV, zapytali się, ile mam lat, na którym jestem roku, ile będę jeszcze studiować, żeby nie płacić za mnie ZUS-u.
I jak reżyser usłyszy, że tak, studiuję teatrologię, czy tam wiedzę o teatrze, nie daj Boże, jeszcze pisałam pracę, a on się tym samym fascynuje, od razu cię weźmie. Niestety nie dostałam nigdy propozycji pracy w teatrze, ale jakby ktoś chciał jakąś dać, to można mnie znaleźć.
Ja też miałam taką możliwość, żeby właśnie jeszcze za dzieciaka, tam to było gimnazjum, liceum, to żeby je chodzić na próby i to wszystko widzieć, tam poznawać ludzi.
Dużo osób nam mówi, że nasza przyszła praca będzie związana z kontaktami, jakie sobie tu wyrobimy. I z jednej strony można się na to burzyć, a z drugiej strony ja mam poczucie, że no jeżeli to i tak są ci ludzie, którzy mają nam dać pracę albo jej nie dać, no to jest trochę chyba jednak po prostu tak już jest.
Nie dostałam nigdy propozycji pracy w teatrze.
Wiesz, po tym można robić wszystko. Można być dziennikarką, mogę być reżyserką, asystentką, producentką, mogę sprzedawać lody i w ogóle. No.
Ja już przestałam tak mówić. Ja teraz mówię, że po znajomości się wszystko załatwi. I że zobaczę, kogo spotkam na swojej drodze. Bo już nigdy nie wiadomo.
Ja też się już teraz nie tłumaczę, ale...
Praca po studiach. Bezpośrednie spotkania z ludźmi teatru to nie tylko możliwość poznania warsztatu i metod pracy, ale również szansa zdobycia kontaktów i nawiązania współpracy, co ułatwia późniejsze odnalezienie się na rynku pracy.
Pracowałam, właściwie po prostu działałam w teatrze ofowym, w Stowarzyszeniu Sztuka Nowa, więc mam jakieś doświadczenie w różnego typu zajęciach w teatrze, ale też raczej nie dostawałam za to pieniędzy.
Aktualnie jestem na stażu w dziale literackim w teatrze w moim rodzinnym mieście, czyli w Kaliszu.
A sama praca w stowarzyszeniu była bezpłatna. Jedynym profitem z niej było to, że mogłam wchodzić na spektakle, czy po prostu byłam częścią jakiejś wspólnoty.
Jest to staż bezpłatny, ale jakby od początku wiedziałam, na czym to będzie polegało.
Mam zaplanowanych kilka rzeczy w najbliższym czasie, za które nie dostanę wynagrodzenia i robię to właśnie w imię zdobywania kontaktów i doświadczenia.
Zaczynam niedługo projekt robić swój, który jest za darmo.
Mogłam być asystentką reżysera w Teatrze Narodowym przez 2 miesiące non-stop, bez żadnego wynagrodzenia i może by się pojawiło moje nazwisko na plakacie.
Zapewnili nam miejsce do pokazania naszego projektu, no ale za scenografię musiałyśmy zapłacić same i też nie miałyśmy pieniędzy, żeby zapłacić aktorce.
Nie wiem właściwie, co mam powiedzieć, bo pieniądze, które zarabiam w teatrze są po prostu śmieszne.
Zajmowałam się produkcją tego spektaklu i to było... Zaczęło się na 2. roku studiów, ale wtedy na początku to było takie bez umowy, nie wiedzieliśmy, czy będą na to pieniądze. Dopiero jakoś w trakcie tego procesu umowy się faktycznie pojawiły, bo zebraliśmy na tyle funduszy, żeby sobie nawzajem zapłacić za te prace.
Pieniądze, które aktualnie zarabiam, to są takie bardzo podstawowe wydatki, albo jak ja to teraz jeszcze nazywam, takie trochę moje zachcianki.
Takie pocket money, które dają rodzice.
We wrześniu będę wchodziła w projekt za pieniądze też, co jest super. Może nie będą to duże pieniądze, no bo to jest praca w teatrze.
Jakieś osoby, które nam pomagały, na przykład przy promocji tego projektu, no dostały, nie wiem, z 200, maks 400 zł za kilka miesięcy pracy, nie? To są mniej więcej takie stawki. Ja dostałam niewiele więcej za 1,5 roku pracy.
W tej chwili w tym projekcie, w którym jestem, zarabiam 2400 na rękę miesięcznie i to jest spoko. To jest okej.
No ale tak naprawdę, gdyby ten etat netto już przełożyć na godziny, no to nie zarabiamy więcej, a nawet chyba tyle samo, ile jest najniższa krajowa, więc myślę, że jeżeli ktoś pracuje po 8 godzin dziennie za taką stawkę, jaką jest minimalna krajowa, nawet w teatrze, tylko po prostu w jakimś dziale administracji, że musi te 8 godzin wysiedzieć, impresariat, sekretariat, BOF i tak dalej, no to jest śmiertelna stawka.
To jest teraz najwyższa kwota, jaką zarabiam do tej pory zarabiałam w teatrze.
Wiadomo, że jeżeli, jakby trzeba zbierać te rzeczy do portfolio, jeżeli chce się dalej coś robić.
Z jakichś tam projektów, które robię, bym się nie utrzymała.
Nie sądzę, żeby było tak, żebym się dała radę utrzymać z teatru.
No na etat dałaby mi prawdopodobnie szansę się utrzymać, ale na bardzo niskim standardzie.
Nie da się zarobić w teatrze.
Absolwenci WOT są cenieni na rynku pracy. Dyplom WOT jest wszędzie wysoko cenionym paszportem do kariery zawodowej.
Mam jakby pracę, która zapewni mi ekonomiczne bezpieczeństwo versus pracę, która może się nie opłacać i może nie dawać możliwości uniezależnienia się od rodziców, ale będzie sprawiać satysfakcję. No i pytanie tak, co wybiorę? Czy jednak to, żeby być dorosłą w pewnym sensie, czy próbować jakby mieć przyjemność w życiu?
Ja na te studia nie szedłem z myślą o tym, że będę w przyszłości pracował w teatrze.
Chyba bym nie chciała pracować w teatrze.
Mam takie zwątpienie związane ze stałą pracą w teatrze.
Tak, na pewno boję się o stawki i o to, na ile psychicznie obciążająca będzie ta praca.
Ja już nie mam czasu na pracę wolontariacką, taką stricte w sensie za uśmiech, za, nie wiem, list gratulacyjny i tak dalej. Że ja bym chciała, żeby ta praca nawet w symboliczny sposób, ale była mi w jakiś sposób wynagradzana, a nie tylko jako wpis do CV.
Jeśli miałabym odstawić na bok to, że właśnie muszę popłacić rachunki, mieszkanie i tak dalej, no to tak, to jest praca marzeń zdecydowanie.
Wczoraj dostałam od cudownej pani Ewy Buchek pytanie, a co potem? Nie mam pojęcia, ale mam takie poczucie, że przez te 3,5 roku jestem bardziej pewna tego, czego nie chcę robić i te studia mi jakoś przez to, że trzeba było spróbować jakichś różnych kolejnych rzeczy, ja wiem, że tych rzeczy nie chcę absolutnie nigdy w życiu robić i nie wiem, czy coś jeszcze magisterka wyeliminuje i w końcu coś zostanie, jedna rzecz, czy może zostanę z takim samym poczuciem, że nie mam pojęcia.
Nazywam się Jerzy Grotowski. Tak naprawdę to nie. Nazywam się Marta Szlas-Orkicka.
Ada Wolińska.
Zuzanna Berus. Jowita Mazurkiewicz.
Dominika Kania.
Krysia Bednarek.
Barbara Ojrzeńska.
Martyna Michalczuk.
Ola Sidor.
Igor Tokarzewski.
Justyna Szczepaniak.
Zosia Marciniak.
Marianna Cieślak.
Iga Skolimowska.
Alicja Zalewska.
Gabriela Madajewska.
Garia Meissler. Albo Maria Geisler.
Olga Grześko.
Dominik Gańko.
No i zajebiście.
And that was Our Life is Crap about students and recent graduates of theater studies at the Theater Academy. We have here Zuzanna Berus, Alicja Borowiec, and Marta Szlasa-Rokicka, whom you've just seen on the screen. They are the filmmakers. And we will be able to talk to them during the Q&A, during the discussion part. And now I want to invite Katarzyna Renes, who will deliver a presentation titled Who Killed Anakin Skywalker? Kasia Renes needs no introduction. Most of you know her as the head of our International Cooperation Department. But she asked me to introduce her as a member of the Projectariat. I know that she likes to refer to herself as a laborer in art. Okay, I graduated 13 years ago. Okay, to begin with, let's have a short test to see if you're suitable to join the Precariat. This won't be public, this won't be open, but answer yes or no in your mind. I have many ideas for cultural projects, and I'm confident that they're brilliant. I have a gift for convincing people to accept my ideas. I keep abreast of important developments in the arts, and I know my cultural environment very well. I also follow international trends. I read philosophical texts. I read legal documents and financial documents. I'm able to run an efficient promotional campaign. I have logistical skills. And I know where to find the equipment I need. I know how much that equipment costs. I'm able to put a price on my work and that of other people adequately. People who are asking too high a rate are asked to reconsider their answer. I know what a license is. I know about copyright. I know how to obtain licenses. I have strong communication skills. I'm not afraid of talking to a dozen or so people every day. I'm ready to work several hours a day for a long period of time, over 10 hours a day, a very long period of time, while being innovative and creative. I can work for free for a long time, and I hope that I will eventually obtain funding for my project. If I don't, I won't give up. I'll just keep trying, creating, inventing, convincing, implementing, and so on and so forth. All my ideas will be good and worth implementing, and I'll respect myself and others, and I'll enjoy it, and I'll not dream of any paid leave or sick leave for that matter. End of test. And if you answered yes to most or preferably all of the questions, then congratulations. You can join the culture Precariat, which is made up of art warriors who possess these qualities. When you answered no, I'm sorry, you're not fit for the culture Precariat. Apply for a permanent job, and if that doesn't work for you, then change professions. Good luck. Of course, I was exaggerating, but only a little. Art is hard work, and independent art is even tougher. Without the right determination, ego, and multitasking, you can't really hope to achieve anything. And you also need to be lucky. So, thinking about this presentation on the Precariat, I thought I'd quote pop culture, specifically Star Wars. If you've ever watched any of the movies, you'll remember Darth Vader, who's a badass in a black helmet, a bad guy. He started out as Anakin Skywalker, one of the most gifted knights of the Jedi Order, endowed with superpowers, determination, ego, and lots of skills. How did a lightsaber-wielding warrior defending the underdog become the terror of the galaxy? What I find interesting about his move to the dark side is a process he went through. Two important aspects: the belief that he was acting in a just cause, and the belief that he was alone with his problems, a toxic tendency towards alienation and emotional closure. A friend with whom I watched Revenge of the Sith said that she was completely unconvinced by this transformation, but I was, because she never worked in culture. From today's point of view, I'd say that Anakin Skywalker was a forerunner of the end product of neoliberalism, overworked, narcissistic, and convinced of the nature of his mission, with not allowing himself to rest or have a private life. He is a reflection of the achievement subject that Byung-Chul Han writes in his famous essays about burnout society. Or social burnout. So Anakin was convinced of his infallibility and talent. He gradually became more distant from the Jedi Order. He rejected their code, the code of controlling emotions and being careful with your power. Anakin believed that he could do anything. And this is a belief that's very close to my heart. Without persistence, affirmation of your ideas, and a sense of agency, it's difficult to make it in the Precariat. We have no boss, no structures. We're the masters, captains of our fate. Byung-Chul Han in Burnout Society devotes a lot of space to the positivity imperative, identifying this phenomenon as one of the most important syndromes of burnout. According to the philosopher, burnout would not occur occur if it were not for the temptation to optimize expressed in the preference for can over should. It is the can that is the main driver of the cultural precariat. Enthralled by the prospect of being able to act independently, focused on it will finally happen, which is often preceded by failed attempts, we forget about our own basic rights and needs. We work too much and talk too little. We focus on the project, the initiative, and motivation. We increase productivity. We race against ourselves. We perceive any loss of health, physical or mental, as a weakness. Success is in the precariat is achieved by self-centered individualists whose ability does not invalidate duty. The imperative of commitment is a crucial concept which refers to responsibility and self-discipline. Any negligence can result in an organization saying goodbye to an opportunity for further funding. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with the Polish government, city authorities, or the European Commission, unless, of course, you know somebody in big business, or you know somebody rich. If your activities have commercial potential, then all the better. But I'm concerned looking at the commodification of culture. I'm not talking about things that are intended to be entertainment. There's a place for that, although I personally have a problem with public funding subsidizing cultural events that do not stimulate intellectual effort or reflection, that may be cerebral and do not take shortcuts. These things may be strange, but it's excellence. We live in an overstimulated world, intensely saturated with events. The ability to find something valuable that stimulates emotional reception is based to a large extent on viewers' trust in institutions which offer such programs. In this system, activities of independent artists depend on finding an institutional partner who will respond favorably to their ideas. However, the precarian is almost always in the position of an applicant, a supplicant, asking for the possibility to do their project. Exceptions are artists with star status, although nothing is given once and for all. More often than not, every project begins from scratch. You make contacts, persuade your partners, raise funds, then you convince critics and the audience, and so on and so forth. We often make compromises, deciding to make concessions in various aspects as long as the project gets done. I notice that an increasing number of artists are opting for purely commercial activities. Managers are frequently guided by the principle of it has to sell. There's no room for a conversation about values, aesthetic experience, or the working process. We're ruled by an algorithm and a grotesquely simplistic narrative in which capitalism is responsible for practically everything worthwhile in contemporary culture as the only option. In this view, market value and commercial success become tantamount to artistic value of the artist. Any sentiment or professional relations based on anything other than mutual profit are out of the question. Economy is both the means and the end. I perform, therefore I am. I exist in the popular consciousness and I make money off that. So, should we be surprised that for an increasing proportion part of the cultural community, this is becoming more appealing than self-exploiting satisfaction, determination-based and hyper-responsible projectariat? Byung-Chul Han points out another aspect, a characteristic of contemporary society, the norm that everybody should take personal initiative and the necessity to be yourself. He speaks of the paucity of connectedness and the imminent systemic violence of achievement society which causes social collapses. He cites Alain Ehrenberg and his thesis that it's not the imperative to be oneself, but the pressure to succeed that causes depression caused by exhaustion. From this perspective, burnout syndrome is not the expression of an exhausted self, but of an exhausted, burnt-out soul. According to Byung, in reality, however, the such sickness is not made by an excess of responsibility and initiative, but rather by the obligation to succeed. He stresses the notion of can and points to what happens when the subject of achievement no longer can. He speaks of neuronal violence, of a lack of being, of the fact that in today's neoliberal world, the master has become the working slave. In this society of oppression, everyone runs their own labor camp. The peculiarity of this gulag is that one's both the prisoner and the guard, the victim and the executioner. We exploit ourselves so that exploitation is also possible without power. We don't need oppressive institutions, we best know how to run ourselves ragged. Jenny Odell, in her book, How to Do Nothing, devotes much stake to a critique of the algorithmization of human life. When we consider how poorly art has fared in a system where only the final outcome matters, we can see that culture is also at stake, writes the artist and university lecturer. What is the outcome that's at stake? What are we racing in? What's this race about? The audience numbers, the flourish of events, the number of likes. I'm saying these words as I recover from what is probably the most serious personal professional crisis I've experienced in my 15 years in the business. 6 months ago, I thought this was my individual case caused by personal characteristics and the environment. In September, I was convinced that I was saying goodbye to culture once and for all, that I no longer had any strength, no more plans, no more ideas, and that it was high time I dropped it and finally took up beekeeping, which has been a lifelong dream, but I don't know anything about bees. Lately, I've started thinking what it was that appeals to me. I've no doubt that it's hard work that requires knowledge, preparation, and technical skills. I suspect that the income from beekeeping, as in culture, is highly uncertain, and you also need to invest something. So after giving it much thought, I came to the conclusion that the most appealing thing about this dream is the peace and quiet. I'm not dreaming about insects. I'm dreaming about silence, de-stressing, de-producing myself in favor of contact with the tangible fabric of life. And that's not just my dream. We're all overworked, whether we create culture, do business, or work in a factory. Productivity matters everywhere. That's why the tolerance for art that cannot be monetized, exploited, or appropriated is getting weaker. There's less demand. Everything has to have a reason, has to have a purpose. A culture that doesn't produce tangible results, that's hard to sell or optimize, has to claim its place in the world and justify its presence. Independent artists are very often struggling to survive, treating art as a hobby or orienting themselves towards more profitable forms of creativity. This is dangerous, and not only because of the economic situation of the precariat. They'll manage. Sooner or later, they will develop survival instincts in the capitalist world, be it artists or the so-called dark matter of art. The latter, by the way, is almost non-existent in independent practice anymore. What's left are the most tenacious, those with an idea, and the biggest egos. There's a growing problem finding people to handle the admin and technical side of projects, which makes me happy because it shows that people are more aware, more assertive, and that there's a change in the younger generation which expects respect, visibility, and equal treatment. Well done. More power to you. The weakening of unpopular culture, highbrow culture, contemporary culture, that's is value-based, thought-provoking, and which is experienced on multiple levels, is characteristic of neoliberal determinism, in which time and attention management have taken the form of a nervous rush, and the human being has been reduced to their market and customer value. Following Byung-Chul Han, this world full of commodities is uninhabitable. It has lost all contact with the divine, the sacred, the mysterious. We live in a transparent department store, controlled and supervised, playing the role of transparent customers. There's no room for beauty or silence. What can't be sold is considered to be weak. What's not non-political is unhelpful. What is non-obvious is seen as stupid. What is ethical is seen as emotional. What is non-patriarchal is judged as hysterical. Independent culture is not to the liking of politicians, businessmen, institutions, or commercial media. Being untranslatable and not easy to understand, it's hard to earn and hard to live off. So why not bees? Not just because I don't know anything about bees. I could probably learn, but I believe that culture is necessary. I'm convinced that if anything, that if there's anything left fighting for, it's beauty. And here I agree with Byung and Odell, who see culture as the alternative to a neoliberal world order. The most significant aspect of this process is pausing. Byung calls it between times and Odell doing nothing. It's really about the same thing, though, contemplation and reflection. A slowing down of time, the absence of compulsion, non-productivity. The overarching goal here is a de facto life experience, proposing forms that do not lend themselves to being absorbed into the capitalist value system, to celebrate and locate oneself in favor of a rejection of being everywhere all at once, disagreeing to an arrangement in which value is determined by sales performance and productivity. Surrendering in the field of culture will not improve the situation. The greatest misfortune of the art precariat is their adoption of meritocratic forms that relate directly to hierarchy, the rhetoric of promotion, populism, and market value, which has nothing to do with the moral and artistic value. Sometimes they go hand in hand, but most often they don't. Culture shouldn't be funded on a discretionary grant basis as it is today. The primary role of art is not to fabricate or constantly produce, but to restore human dignity. To get back to Byung, in which we use all our senses. It's a culture that's a secret garden. We need to stop not only for our social condition, but also if we want to survive. In the rush of development based on self-exploitation, we've already gone so far that only a deep reflection on the condition of the world can bring a chance to sustain our species. Our role is to remind people of this. The obvious crimes of capitalism, colonization, genocide, plantation slavery, oil wars, the drive to restrict workers' rights, and most importantly, the looming climate catastrophe, perhaps most importantly, can't be ignored in favor of a blind admiration for technology and the capability of individuals. This also applies to culture. For the colonial mindset, self-exploitation and success ethic feed into one another, dominating all actions of all areas of action and creativity. So let's get back to Anakin. Who killed him? No one. He did it himself. Driven by frustration, fears, opportunities, and a belief in his own power, he denied his values, abandoned his loved ones, became Lord Vader, and crossed over to the dark side. After that, conquest of the galaxy, governing by force and fear, and the frustration caused by a lack of not enough power. The story of Anakin Skywalker is a tale as old as the world, repeated a million times. Bad advisors, crossing a red line, loss of values, the breaking off of alliances, in favor of one's own ego and about one's downfall, because all these stories end the same way. Sooner or later, the protagonist dies. This isn't just fiction. Most of humanity's achievements have been attained through collective action. Putting individuals on a pedestal is attractive in fiction and the media, but it's the cooperation of many individuals, generations, institutions, and environments that's made us what we are, and that has helped us thrive. The lone hero is doomed to fail in the movies and in real life. That's why we need alliances. It's worth recalling that progress, humanitarian progress, has largely come about thanks to the struggle of trade unions and social movements, thanks to publicly funded research, public health service, and a universal education system, which has almost every time met with the resistance of the capitalist class. So how can we cooperate? First of all, we need to see one another, which is already a big step. We need to communicate, which is very difficult, not because we can't speak. Many of us are fluent in several languages. It's just that we're not as good at listening. It's worth recalling Pauline Oliveros, who points to art and contemplation as tools to carry out practice deep listening. The Contemporary Art Gallery in Katowice practiced observing one's own body, which was supposed to lead to an ability to listen to the other. The aim of those exercises was to transform perceptual habits in order to develop an attitude of alertness and openness towards the environment. The exhibition in Katowice had three subjects: listening as a research tool that gave voice to the silenced, therapeutic exercises in mindfulness, and above all, listening to your environment, sensitive and critical. Deep listening precedes the between times, Byung, and doing nothing, Odell. Byung explicitly points to deep boredom as an escape that allows for true understanding and dialogue. This takes time. The basis of communication is attentiveness and openness. That's why it's so valuable, although increasingly rare, for people with differing views to talk to each other without fighting. You need to find room for polemics, and the same goes for a new system, a brave new world.
You just listened to Katarzyna Renes's paper, Who Killed Anakin Skywalker. And now I would like to invite Bernard Siebert and Gerko Eggert from Germany to give their presentation. This presentation will be in English. So if anybody needs the translation into Polish, you can pick up a headset near the back entrance. So this part of our panel is titled Challenges in Teaching the Arts Today.
Hi, welcome. I'm Gerko, this is Bernard, and we will both, as the title says, Challenges in the Teaching the Arts Today. We'll talk about, or from the point of our experiences as teaching art, or teaching theory in an art context, at least from my point, and at Gießen University. So this is the context where we both are or were based and where our teaching experiences come from.
And just quickly, thank you so much for the invitation.
all of the organizing team. It's an amazing work, and thank you so much, especially for the brilliant translation to the people in the translation booths over there.
Yes, also thank you from my side. Yeah, I think we both could talk quite a lot about precarity also in the field of the university or the art schools in Germany. Right now, there is a lot of protest going on in Germany because there's a new law that increases even more the precarity of people working at the university that are not or that are one below the level of full professors. So yeah, there is a lot to say about today. We want to focus on the question of teaching, of pedagogy in the classroom, and of course both levels are very much interconnected, especially if we want to engage in any kind of critical pedagogy. I think we need to take account the institutional context that this happenings in, the teaching happens in, and of course precarity there runs transversely through the practices in the classroom and in the whole institution. Yeah, so for my side, as I said, I'm teaching theory, which is, I would say, a bit different than teaching artistic practices, but of course there are a lot of similarities and certain issues that come up in both cases, but there are of course also some differences. And yeah, so if we think it in relation to the question of precarity, for me, one main thing that I always need to navigate, or that when teaching, when needs to navigate, is of course a classroom that is happening, or teaching that is happening somewhere between, on the one side, the pole of having a totally structured teaching setting with very preset curriculum, very preset structures, and then on the other hand, a very open space where there's no structure pre-given, a very open situation to engage in a non-structured way. And I think what's interesting for me is that both sides, or both poles, came from a very emancipatory level, or or they have a very emancipatory potential. On the one hand, of course, opening up the classroom, getting rid of the old established structures was a kind of, okay, we don't want to perpetuate these structures. We want to act against all the problems that come with these structures. But then on the other side, these introducing certain kind of structures of organizing the classroom in a certain way also came with the promise, or with the idea that we need a certain kind of structure to avoid especially implicit hierarchies, to avoid certain kind of informal power relations. And yeah, so this, and I think that the question really then for me is, okay, how to engage in teaching from a position that is neither falling into this very rigid structures of yeah, having everything pre-organized, setting me as a teacher the one who is allowed to set up these structures, and everyone having to obey to these structures. And then on the other hand, not falling into the trap of saying, okay, only by opening these structures, only by not introducing any kind of regulation, all the power relations will vanish. Because then I think especially questions of a social background, of like how one performs as a person and so on come in very strongly, and I think we really need like practices and techniques that not only like avoid the old structures of teaching, but really counter them and really like try to work against them and to introduce like new forms, new practices that can help to to break certain habits, to break certain like very embodied forms of learning. Because I think when coming to the university, the thing is we already like have learned quite strongly how to learn at school, and it's this what we have to really work against it. And from this position, I started my engagement in pedagogies, and not only in the university, but also very strongly like outside of the university, of like alternative forms of teaching that are not necessarily part of a university setting. And for this, 3 years ago, we founded a platform which started with a publication, and do I have a... Oh yeah, you can see it here, and I also brought 2 copies of a book we published, which is unfortunately in German. Oh. You can see it here, but it's there's an English version of the introduction. I think it's on the next slide. Also, the link to this introduction, and our aim was to think, okay, how can we like get out of a certain way of teaching that we are so familiar with at the university, and really see the potential in, and the next one. Sorry, this is the table of content, and here you have the link to the English version of the introduction. So how to get away from this like structures we have so habitualized at the university, and really like looking at the field of the arts and activism especially, and invited colleagues from all 3 fields to contribute how they teach, how they like work, and even though they might not call it teaching, they engage in certain ways of knowledge transfer, or engaging with knowledge in rehearsal processes and in like activist meetings and so on. And we ask them to write down their practices, and like the subtitle of the book is like a speculative handbook, and the idea was really to invite them to write it as a how-to, but as a how-to that is not necessarily like meant to like work very well, or like it was that keeps the speculative dimension of the speculative dimension of, okay, there needs to be an adaptation, a transformation, a reformulation of every practice when it comes to a new context. And so, for example, using techniques that stem from the field of the arts in academic teaching, but also like techniques from activism in the arts. And this is maybe I will focus on this today, because I think a lot of the topics we addressed yesterday and today are really at the intersection of, or when we look at it as on the level of practices, are like combining practices coming more from a traditional field of art and art making, and also from activism. And there's a lot of knowledge and practical knowledge, techniques of activists who engage with for example, here we have one contribution of anti-racist allyship, but of course also questions of transformative justice or community accountability and so on. So we have this rich pool of techniques, and to really introducing these techniques into art making, and this is something I would emphasize in these short remarks, is to not think of them as secondary to art making, to not think, okay, we have these like practices, we already know how to like act, how to set up performance, how to direct, and so on. And now we have to add these these new practices somehow into the process. But then they will always keep like this position of being like just a secondary practice. And when it comes to resources and time, the argument will always be like, yeah, but we don't have time to engage with it fully, or we don't have the resources fully. Of course you don't have the resources if you don't like rethink what you're already doing. And so for this, I really want to emphasize the our way of like thinking, okay, how can we, for example, make art with that is not like includes these questions of, for example, feminist practices, anti-racist practices, and so on, but really is based on these practices, really taking these practices serious as artistic practices, and by circulating practices between like these fields like academia, art, and activism. I think there's a lot of potential there, and this is what the book and the website is really about. The website is still growing, and it's including more and more English language texts. So if you're interested in looking at it, you will find some of them already in English, and there will be more in the future. And so for me, it's not so much now of presenting a book, but really of like presenting the idea of, okay, how to engage with like this very rich pool of practices that are not limited to the arts, but really to look at different fields and see okay, what kind of knowledge, of ways of engaging in pedagogical ways with these with different topics is there, and we can make use of it. And with this, I will hand over to Bernhard.
Thanks, Gerko. I see what you say in the book that you published together with Julia B. also as a reaction to the challenges that are on the table. That the changes that are wished for, how can academia, how can teachers react on what's there, and what is wanted, what is wished for. And I want to add a very simple question. I come to you with a very simple question. What does teaching theater actually mean? We have been talking so much about teaching, about those institutions where things are taught. But I have to say that I missed a little bit the part about theater. So, of course we need change in our institutions. But which change specifically do we need for theater education? Being part of the change program from the beginning, or from the point where this beautiful application was written, I have to say that I was busy with this question. We have had discussions between schools as different as the Alexander Severovich National Academy of Dramatic Arts, where we are here in Warsaw, the Academy of Theatre and Dance in Amsterdam, the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Glasgow, the Paris-based Conservatoire National Supérieur d'Art Dramatique, and where Gerko and I are from the Institute for Applied Theatre Studies in Gießen. And we have been discussing for several years now, if you will, and it has been intense. I will argue that as theater teachers, we are a first audience. We teach people about how something has been done, is done right now, or could be done in the future. Let's also think back to yesterday when we were talking about a theater of the future. We have heard about certain models of teaching here and in the last, especially yesterday, but I don't necessarily limit my ideas now to one way or the other of teaching. What I want to stress instead is the fact that when we are in the classroom or when we are teaching, we also might have in mind always another further audience, which is the one that students will be confronted with in the future, be it in the next rehearsal showings, be it in their professional lives after school. We have heard about this too, whether we call it outside world or market or industry. There was a big discussion around that yesterday. I have to think about this in a very concrete way. Oftentimes when talking to students after showings, I ask things like, what do you want the audience to understand really? What do you want them to take with them? Or how do you address the audience? I ask these questions because I understand it as my task to imagine a certain possible audience that is beyond my current reach. This is why I would say that at theater school, there's the idea of a double audience at play. As teachers, we are some kind of first audience, and then there's the second audience that we always have in our minds. And that also where some of the stress comes from, right? As teachers, we somehow are stand-ins for future audiences, and the challenge is to take this seriously. Now, let me go one step further. When preparing a talk for the Change Now conference that we did in Amsterdam a year ago, which was a whole lot of different discussion there, I found myself going back to Judith Butler. I reread their ideas on the production of selfhood. Butler looks at how sexual identity is formed by telling things about yourself and by observing yourself continuously. They claim that there's a disciplinary system at work that wants people to self-report and to self-observe. And I think this is especially to be taken into account when looking at theater education. Let's read a quick snippet of how Butler puts it. They say, the act of self-reporting and the act of self-observation takes place in relation to a certain audience, with a certain audience as the imagined recipient, before a certain audience for whom a verbal and visual picture of selfhood is being produced. I argued then in Amsterdam that if we take this seriously, then we have to do with an everyday theater of self-production that is somehow connected to sexuality, but also we could say that this theater of self-reporting and self-observing is connected to many other, more identity markers. If you will, we constantly produce ourselves and perform ourselves with, as Butler puts it, a certain audience as the imagined recipient. A disciplinary framework makes us perform ourselves, and students, I would argue, are in the midst of finding their own voice, their own expression, their own identity. Looking at the discussions here, it has become clear that identity markers and identity politics have become immensely important for representational reasons. And I only have to think about the performances I've seen here yesterday and the day before. On Tuesday evening, we have seen Melina Brinkmann and Dana Maxim rehearsing Resistance, a totally new show. They were putting on stage a series of more or less theatrical exercises that were aimed at getting more resilient when confronting abusive situations. Therefore, they were performing and rehearsing at the same time. And also inviting us as an audience to perform and rehearse and get more resilient with them. Just yesterday evening, we were invited to see Men's Talk, a play directed by Katarzyna Warnke that was performed by Grupa California, which is Maciej Wałczyński, Dominik Rubaj, and Adam Szustak, where we saw different scenes of the production of masculinity on stage, just next door. So let's say that the expression of the self and elaborating on the own physicality, feelings, and the situatedness, developing an own artistic identity, is always already happening in a disciplinary framework, everyday framework. The challenge now would be, how can we include the idea of that framework into the teaching at theater schools? There's a connection between this theater of becoming a person and the theater world as such. And I think theater education is at an important position in this connection. To ask more precisely and more scholarly, how can we have the educationality and the self-productivity of theater in mind when setting the stage for our very own teaching spaces and teaching practices. Yesterday, beautifully, in Broderick Chow's keynote, Dear Brother, a complicated epistemological letter or suite of letters that was brought before us, we heard about the idea of a pedagogy of accompaniment, which I understand as a way of accompanying the ones that we teach, walking with them a while, talking with them, writing to them. Let me extend this proposal by saying that we could talk about a pedagogy of being a good audience in this theater of self-production, of personhood that the students find themselves in. Thanks.
To teraz przejdziemy do części.
Okay, and now for the part where we can talk a while. We just need to rearrange the chairs, so give us a moment. We already have Bernhard Siebert and Gürko Eggert from Germany, from Gießen. Now let's invite Zuzanna Berus, Alicja Borowiec and Marta Szlasa-Rocicka from the Alexander Zelwerowicz Academy of Dramatic Art, the creative team behind the film we saw at the beginning. And let's also have Katarzyna Renes, who as a true worker, laborer of art, is now setting up the chairs on stage. My name is Marta Miłoszewska, and I'm the Dean of Stage Directing at the Theatre Academy. I'll be moderating the discussion. The topic of precarity, which is our subject, is something we could be talking about all week, I suppose, but we only have 20 minutes, so I won't take up too much of your time with my questions, because I would like to hand the microphone over to our audience. But before we do that, there's one thing we forgot to mention at the beginning, and again, we're very impressed by the work of our interpreters. Hello. So let's appreciate our interpreters, who were actually given an English copy of the presentation, so they had it easy.
Thank you very much. Bernard Siebert is with us. Bernard is educator, dramaturg, producer.
Sorry, Kasia. Przepraszam, nieporozumienie.
Thank you very much, dear translators. We really appreciate your work.
Przepraszam, nie dogadałyśmy się. Myślałam, że to jest tak ustalone.
Okay, no, I'm sorry, I was a little confused. Anyway, for the purpose of this talk, let me briefly define precarity as a contemporary social class made up of people suffering or experiencing a lack of predictability in life, a lack of a secure and stable employment, not enjoying material well-being or mental well-being. Okay, we began with a film where students of theater studies at the Theatre Academy told us about their prospects, about the effort it takes, about how much it takes to make a living in Warsaw, to study in Warsaw, the economic and mental burden of combining work and education, and what it is to find a career in the performative arts. And finally, and then Katarzyna Renes, the head of our International Cooperation Office, told us about her difficult experience working as a member of the Projectariat. And then we had Bernhard and Gurko, who told us, who said how as teachers we can follow or accompany, the people we teach, we can accompany students. And again, it was always difficult, but COVID, the war in Ukraine, the economic crisis, and the currently inflation that we were having have hit us with the force of a meteor, and everything is changing, everything has changed, and there's no end in sight to the crisis. So my question is, and here I'd hand it over so what can you do looking to see the glass as being half full and not half empty, and is that possible at all? So what can we do?
Możemy się zatrzymać o tym.
Okay, we can stop. We can stop and look around and see the world from a different vantage point. That's my experience. And I speak for myself. It's difficult for me to say what we can do. I can tell you what I'm doing personally. For me, a very important aspect is giving up. It's very important to renounce, give up your own responsibility, which is difficult, and then shift that towards shared responsibility with a trusted team of co-workers. And I think we have a trusted team of co-workers. This conference was organized by a collective. Even though there's a lot of work involved, I don't feel overburdened. I think it's largely a question of a mindset. And again, the burden, the workload, the emotional toll that it takes. I have to say I don't know, because that's not something I've been taught. And we tried to show it in the film that studying theater studies highlights or rewards individualism. And it's very difficult to find yourself working in a collective, in a group, and we don't really know teamwork because it's all about individuality, so that's what's rewarded. I really don't know if I can trust other people working with them and not feel overburdened and not take on the full responsibility for the project. Of course, when we were working on this film, it was largely done collectively. Okay, I did the editing, I directed, and I filmed it, so I did a large part of the work, but I can't say I felt so much, maybe I felt so much responsibility that I didn't want to let other people in. I didn't let anybody else do more, because I felt it was all up to me. I don't know if that was right or wrong, but that's the experience I have. Sorry, stage fright. I feel that this is a conversation about losing, because whatever you say, you lose. I mean, we won't affect the minimum wage. We won't do anything about inflation. Even if we set up collectives, even if we work in groups that are based on caring, but that's the only thing we can do in the face of this helplessness. And it's, from the perspective of someone who's lost, I think that talking about it, I have no way, there's no really way institutionally or systemically to act in this way. It's like, it's what Alicja said. But I'm thinking it makes you appreciate the small things. When people who show that they care for you. And it's interesting, in the context of our film, it's a very personal thing. So our learning about the theater community the way students are introduced to theater. That was very personal, a very personal experience. It ricocheted, but it backfired kind of, but it also, thanks to that, I've done things that have helped me grow. So I think that this caring, this focus, this attentiveness extended to students is a foundation that won't change anything, but without that, you wouldn't be able to do anything at all. So may I mean, Marta, please, I'm sorry I tend to hog the microphone, but I did want to add something. This was very inspiring, what you said. I cut my text short. I only had 20 minutes, but now I want to respond. It's not that we don't have a say. It's not that we can't make a difference. In parallel to what we're doing, there are workshops in improv, which are run by my friend Paweł Negebauer. And 10 years ago, when these improv groups were being set up, these were groups of friends who really couldn't do anything. It was something they felt like they wanted to do. Now, Krzysztof is the director of a theater in Warsaw, so it's become institutionalized, and the city of Warsaw has, among others, thanks to your efforts and the effort of many other people in the community. So in Warsaw, there are social culture institutions, which there's recently, there was a space opened called the Hashtag Ensemble. It's another example that emerges from new music. It's always outside of everything, outside the mainstream, totally fringe. But thanks to the resolve and determination, and thanks to an institutional capacity, they did make a change. I could also, of course, this might be really heavy what I'm going to say now, but the fact that we're here today, this is an international conference. It's not us talking on a park bench. So I think that without this discussion, without this communication, without this exchange, without talking about all these needs, I think this is really the first step towards doing anything. And really, Marta, I wanted to say, Marta Szlasa, so don't stop, really, don't give up, hey. Thanks. I agree, of course, and it's great to see these initiatives becoming more professionalized, becoming more professional, but we're graduates. Now, we've recently graduated. We're kind of between projects. There's one 3-month project for 500 euros and one 2-month project for whatever. So it's great. I work with the foundation of Performative Arts Institute, without which I wouldn't have done something I cared about. So, yeah, and I'm grateful and for this support. But from our standpoint, it's still difficult to see things that way. I'm also very happy that we began with a screening of this film of your film. For me, personally, as a lecturer, as someone who teaches, it's wrenching. It's really poignant. It's very powerful because we're talking about art ideals and all that. But and we let people graduate, and we're aware of what's outside the door of the school. It's something I've been dealing with for 20 years, Kasia 15, Bernhard and Gurko for probably whatever, same now, but it's something that you've all been encountering for a few months and a few years. That's the way life is, that's the environment we live in. Yesterday, somebody said that we have 120 institutional theaters in Poland, and I saw our guests from abroad kind of being impressed because it's quite a lot. There are ensembles, companies in 120 theaters in Poland. But let me just, to offset that, 90% of all artists in Poland are freelancers. Performers, artists are freelancers. So it really doesn't matter how long you're in the profession. It's a question of being alone, of being left to your own devices. And that's something that seems very interesting and worth looking at, mentioning. So for you, how can you bring together, how can you join forces and exist in this spectrum, find a place in this spectrum between the need for self-organization and solitude and solitary work to improve our conditions?
It's a difficult question, but it's the question that might be crucial for an international get-together such as this. And maybe I come back to your very first question that seems so simple. Is the glass half full or is it half empty? And thank you so much to the three of you for being on stage and for showing this movie, because coming here, we don't know about the glass. We have to be told about where the water comes from, where the glass is actually positioned, who has filled it, to which height. And so there's a whole performance before we get the glass handed out. And I think it helps us to exchange on this European level also. I mean, this is my hope, but that's why I tried to engage also in this conference. I think when I think so, I have to go back to this the whole project of Change Now that has been going on for 3 years now, and I have to say that I thought I also was, when I come back to this idea of naivety, I think I was a little bit naive that just exchanging information about glasses and how full they are solves the problem, or we get to a certain conclusion there. It's actually, it was very complicated to find common ground and to also define or get a grasp of the problems that are there for the different students in the different countries. And yeah, that's a little bit the start of my thinking, that we needed that time. I think we could even need more time, but this is somehow now manifesting itself. Being able to be together, that is something that we haven't been able to in the beginning of the project because the pandemic didn't make it possible. And yeah, I saw that some of the questions could be answered, and some are still somehow unsolved on the table before us.
Yeah, let me just add that one of the ideas we had in Poland to address the question of precarity was to adopt an act on the status of artists, which was then called the rights of professional artists. It was a great draft. I was representing the Guild of Polish Stage Directors, working on the draft. There were representatives of several dozen Polish art associations and professional guilds. 3 years of effort with free of charge, volunteered our time, energy. We came up with a great document, which for the past 3 years is moved from desk to desk, is being shifted. And countless times we've heard how close it is to being adopted. Of course, as you can imagine, cooperation with the present right-wing government for many of us wasn't easy. Many of us had to hide, had to kind of, for a moment, the cooperation went very well. So for a moment, we forgot about politics. But now my belief that the project will ever be adopted has crumbled. But at least if the purpose being to make your life easier, professional. So there's an election coming up. The draft is out there. Take a look. You can read it, and anybody can support it, or anybody can quote it or refer to it. That's a specific tool that's out there we have on the table, but it's still not been enacted. I know that it's different in different countries. Okay, I see somebody. Ula Kijak from the Guild of Polish Stage Directors. Stage director and activist. Thank you very much. I hope you're not bored of me asking questions all the time, but now I really don't know what question I want to ask. I wanted instead to share some thoughts. Maybe the question is, does it ring? Does it kind of click with But first a digression. I really wanted to thank Katarzyna Renes for asking what art is for in her presentation. I think that's a really important discussion that we've not been having for the past 30 years in Europe, and it's a discussion that we really need to keep going. And thanks for that. But moving on to my thoughts, it all comes together, and excuse me, forgive me if my statement doesn't seem coherent. I think I may be wrong. Okay, or my communication skills might be lacking. Okay, let me begin with at the end. It's great what you said about every answer, whatever, about anything we say will be coming from a place of failure. That's very difficult. That's kind of difficult to hear. But I think we need, as a community, as artists, we need, and also all the non-artistic professions, auxiliary professions, if you will. So we need, I think we all need some kind of support, some sort of reinforcement. We need to cultivate failure as something that's not wrong, as something we need. Failure helps us grow. Failure helps us learn. Failure can be a source of strength. Failure is a common community experience. It's a foundational, it's a basic experience. Okay, I'm not referring to the fall of the Warsaw Uprising or whatever, but this everything we do draws on, and it's something I haven't been taught in school, that it's okay to make mistakes. And anything you do artistically begins with not knowing, and every successive failure can be the source of, can help you find something else. So that also connects with what I've been thinking about. I studied stage directing with Marta here in these in the academy. So it's been what 20 years almost since we graduated. And ever since then, I've been watching, I've been figuring out what I haven't been taught, even if I don't like thinking about teaching as a transfer of knowledge, teaching someone, conveying, answering questions. Instead, I like, I've also taught myself, I've also been a teacher.
Przekazującej wiedzę,
że wolę myśleć so actually I prefer to think about teaching, like Broderick said yesterday, in that context, in the context of learning together, or in the context of moderating a process of learning for the people we are expected to teach. So I was watching myself and my colleagues in the context of what we hadn't been taught by, or hadn't even been told that there's an issue. So nobody began the conversation, nobody even said that there was an area that I ought to explore. So looking at the makeup of this panel, at the agenda of this panel, there was a film showing the experience of students or fresh graduates, and thanks for the film. I think we're neglecting first-hand experience very much. So we're neglecting, we don't ask questions, we don't ask, like the creative team behind this film, okay, so what are you missing, or what would you like? Is there anything? So we're not looking back. Or I may be wrong, maybe.
Natomiast mam wrażenie, że że ta konstrukcja pokazuje, że jakby mamy jakieś kolejności.
I think there's a sequence in which we exist in the project period or the precarious arts community. And I think
Odnosząc się do tego self-reporting,
on self-reporting and self-observation, speaking of
myślę, że to
learning,
nie tylko chodzi o to, co Butler miał na myśli w
it's not
kontekście płci,
just
ale w
what
ogóle,
Butler meant about gender,
wczoraj też było ileś
but
takich wątków, mam
yesterday
wrażenie,
I felt
że
this was mentioned.
wielkim brakiem naszego środowiska,
One thing that we're not
edukacji
doing
jest to,
in education is that we don't teach people, future art workers, how to develop themselves personally, how to see what works for them, how to take care of themselves, what helps, how to ensure, how to look for inspiration, how to rest, where to set your boundaries, and and how to cooperate. So this communal reflection is something that we're missing educationally and as a community. Is there the question is, am I right?
30 seconds, because it's really important. I know I'm not going to reply. I just want to take the influence part and say that Gregory is here, the Chancellor of Paris Conservatoire, and we really talked about what Ula said last year. And Gregory, I really hope that you will let me do the seminar in July about the failure. We talked about this last year, so I hope it's on the stage. Thank you.
Czas nas goni i to jest ten dylemat, czy wypełnić program panelami mnogością tematów, czy czasem na dyskusję staramy się znaleźć jakiś kompromis, czasami jest trudny. I myślę, że to też to, co nam wychodzi z tych wszystkich dzisiejszych prezentacji, ale i wczorajszych, że wczoraj narzekaliśmy na neoliberalizm i jak strasznie narzuca nam wokabularz rynkowy w sztuce i jak dużo złego to
imposing on us this market vocabulary. That it's bad. On the other hand, when the pandemic started, we all threw ourselves into trying to prove that we are not just the creative sector, but that we are an industry and that we generate huge profits for society. I don't know if you know this, in Poland, the creative industry brings in more money than hotels and tourism together, which shows that this precarity that we are forced into is one of the systemic ways of managing our consciousness. It's very important to be aware of this because awareness is our strength. Does anybody else want to say anything, or can we wrap up this part of the
Zachęcamy do rozmów na przerwie.
You're welcome to talk during the break.
Because we need to do the break, sorry.
Bardzo dziękuję.